Welcome to Building Stories, the podcast where we tell honest and sometimes funny stories about construction and digital transformation. And we're honoured to have Matthew Mackey with us from Arcadis today, and also our CEO, Ricky Sefter. Matthew, would you like to give us a quick intro of yourself, a bit about your role and where you come from?
Yeah, thanks, Luke, and thanks for inviting me on. So, Matthew Mackey, I'm the National Service Lead for Cost and Commercial Management at Arcadis in Australia. Arcadis is a big global beast, as you know, and we've probably got about a QS cost management team, about 4,000 QSs globally. The Christmas party is absolutely amazing. And I'm responsible for the Australian team here, so everything in the kind of construction sphere is what we deal with.
Yeah, awesome. And how did you find yourself in that role? Talk us through some of your early years and maybe schooling, and
so you're gonna
did you always dream of
it? Because I forgot to put myself on Do Not Disturb, and I just got a Teams call come through. So, apologies for that. So
you can never turn off.
Yeah. I'll just put myself on Do Not Disturb to stop that from happening.
Yes.
I'll do it on my phone as well. So apologies. I've already created work for you.
No stress.
No problem. So we'll cut it out.
Easy cut.
No
because as soon as it started coming through, I couldn't hear a word you were saying, Luke. So I couldn't even ask the question if I wanted to.
Oh, I think I can paraphrase. So, well, Luke was asking, how did you get into the field that you've gotten into, Matthew? Kind of take us back to perhaps your university days, your first job. How do you end up where you are?
Yeah, I would like to say that I got into this completely by accident, but it wasn't really. It was kind of a well-trodden path. So I've been in the industry now 25 years between the UK and Australia, and I went to university to actually do a degree in quantity surveying. It's slightly different over here. In Australia, you tend to do like a construction management degree that has a major in quantity surveying, but in the UK, there are a number of universities that do quantity surveying as a full-on degree, as a profession. And I did that not because I was particularly wanted a career in quantity surveying. I just wanted something vocational. And to be honest, when I started the degree, I didn't really have a clue what a QS did. And it was a sandwich degree, so we had 1 year where we worked in industry. And that kind of really opened my eyes to the whole thing. I worked for a contractor for 12 months and really enjoyed that, and then finished university and got a graduate position for a local partnership called Garner Theobald in London. And as they say, the rest is history. I just kind of went my way through there, got through my graduate role, got professionally accredited, moved back up to Manchester, eventually moved to Arcadis in the UK, and just worked through until, as you do, work hard, became more and more senior,
nice.
And then moved out to Australia in 2010. So it was the reason people ask me why did I pick quantity surveying, and like I said, I didn't really know what it was at the time. But bizarrely, I knew I wanted to go to university to do a degree and to have that university experience, but to get something vocational. So at least if I could get a job at the end of it, rather than doing something arty and still not know what I wanted to do. And I remember my mum was in the car with my mother, and she was driving me around this where we live, this particular nice end of the town. And she said, and I don't know what she based this on, but she said something along the lines of all these big detached houses here. Quite a few of them are quantity surveyors, so they earn quite a bit of money. So that was the initial motivation. I thought, there's clearly good money in it, so I'll do that. I've no idea what her data set was to make that kind of statement, and I found out that they probably don't earn as much money as my mum was indicating. But I've grown to love the job regardless, and have continued to do it. Where a lot of my peers have moved into other things, either working for developers or moved into project management or other aspects of the industry. I've kind of stuck with it. I really do enjoy it.
Mate, just maybe obviously broad audience base, right? A lot of people listening in are from either tech background, honestly, just construction, but even from a construction background, people listening in, you don't work for one of the builders. So tier one builders or GCs, they normally also have their own estimation team. So how's your role different? What is QS in the scheme of things?
So, well, QSs can work on both sides of the aisle, if you like. You can either work client side, so you work for a consultancy and you advise clients, or you work directly for a contractor and you work as part of the contractor's in-house team in terms of cost planning and procurement, etc. We on the consulting side, we tend to provide third party impartial advice to clients. When you're working with the contractor, you're basically trying to manage their bottom line to an extent, how they should tender projects. But also from the consulting side that I'm on, we do actually work for builders occasionally as well, whether that's repairing builders of quants, supporting them on cost planning of big projects, for example. Part of the team in Brisbane are supporting CPB contractors on New Bundaberg Hospital, for example. So we do support builders as well. QSs, consultancy, PQSs is what it's called, professional quantity surveying. They can be appointed by contractors as part of like defence projects and that kind of thing. So you can work both sides, even if you are on the consultancy side. If you are working for the builder versus working for the consultant, it can be a little bit different because the motivations and the aims of what you're trying to do are marginally different.
So for the builders, when you're working with them, is that often because it's a DNC type of a project?
No.
Is that when you come in?
Not necessarily. They tend to be more managing contracting type offers. So if you say like a typical defence project, for example, the bigger defence projects would have like a tier one builder, so a Lend-Lease or a CPB, those kind of guys. And under the defence procurement model, they have to employ a QS to support with trade packages and support with cost planning. So sometimes it's DNC, but generally it's always because it's some kind of managing contractor type procurement route.
Gotcha. Mate, obviously it sounds quite intensive. I imagine you are sitting in front of like a curved, big LCD screen with lots of spreadsheets. What does a typical day-to-day or a week look like for you? What tools are you touching? What tech stack? What does the role actually involve?
Well, my role has obviously changed quite a bit now from what I'm doing now to what I was doing 20 years ago. So it's less in the weeds of delivering projects, and it's more about what the role I'm doing now is more strategy. It's more about consistency, standardization, more dealing with clients at a higher level and managing people, because without managing people, we won't be able to do any of this. Yeah. But in terms of the tools that we use, it really depends. So we use something called Expert Estimator, which is from Pronamics. We use that for some of our infrastructure work. We use Costex, which was originally produced by Exacto, who got acquired by IIB, which I know you guys are familiar with. Still lots of Excels. The QS industry, we do talk a very, very good game about how innovative and digital we are. And that generally means that we're using Power BI somewhere, and we think that's that's the cutting edge of technology. So there's still lots of spreadsheets. Everything is still kind of ruled by Excel. And whenever you do get some kind of innovation, the challenge isn't necessarily the technology that you want to use. We've had this conversation previously about some software that we've tried to develop in-house. The challenge wasn't necessarily about the software. It was about getting people to change and getting people to move away from the comfort, the broad hug and the comfy blanket of using Excel, which everybody can use because it's so versatile, to actually using a different type of product and therefore changing how people work and changing workflows and changing how they have to do things. What I've found generally the hard way is that people only really want to, they will adopt technology if there is absolutely no cost to them. If there is absolutely no way, if they don't have to change how they would normally approach delivering a problem or delivering an estimate or a cost plan, provided they can deliver that in exactly the same way, they're happy to use whatever technology you throw in front of them. As soon as they've got to change their approach to make the technology or the innovation work better, that's when that's when the barriers kind of come in, and that's when excuses come in that it's too hard to use, etc. So still very much Excel based, still using products like Costex, etc. But it's we are a little bit behind the curve when it comes to tech.
So talk to us a little bit about that, because again, as a human race, we've gone from pen and paper, we've gone to computers, spreadsheets, right? So we are capable of making change at a wholesale level. But what you're talking about is in-house technology that's been developed for your business needs. It's come from within the business. It's got all the deep understanding. When you talk about change management, are you talking about like the way it needs to flow in their workflow? And I don't quite understand, or maybe perhaps more for the listeners, like why would there be a challenge? Because that's something we often hear, that, hey, we're going to do this ourselves.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it should be much of a barrier. So the piece of software that we developed in-house, and we developed here in Australia, and we've now rolled it out globally across our cost and commercial management business, is called Cost Clarity. And the original intent and the purpose of it was to improve the service we give to our clients. So rather than clients being given PDF documents via email or Excels or Power BIs or whatever, that they would be able to log into a digital, online, web-based environment, access their project, and see all the information, from the detailed cost breakdowns to benchmarking to analysis, all in one place. And that wouldn't just be a one-off for every project. That would be every time we would issue a new report, you could go in and see what the project's up to. So that was the intent. And you go and speak to any QSs about that kind of idea, and they would all embrace it, say, yeah, it sounds great. The problem comes in is when it becomes part of the workflow. So to try and make any kind of, in my experience, to try and make any kind of technology work, whether it's off the shelf or whether it's something you build yourself, you've got to be very, very clear on what the benefits are. And the benefits to clients are obvious, and the benefits that we sell to clients are obvious. And again, everybody in the business would appreciate and kind of acknowledge and understand those benefits. The challenge comes into the benefits for the individual who are actually making it work. So you've got people who are doing, developing cost plans, they're doing their measures, they're using something like Costex, and then they've got to get that output into this new environment. And that requires a slight change of workflow. It requires, for us, a standardization of cost breakdown structure across all of our jobs, which doesn't sound like a massive issue. But when you've got 10, 20, 30, 40 people who all have their own little subtleties of how they do stuff, and it's the same in most QS businesses that I've worked in, that just getting them to change that little bit, because they like to they start a new project, they take the last project that they did and use that as a basis and build from there, rather than just like a blank template. It's just the way that people have just got used to working. So when you step in there and you say, right, we can't do that anymore, you've got to use this, and you've got to do this kind of upload, and these are the steps you go through, there's almost an element of there's too much information, regardless of how simple you try and make it. And it's a case of, oh, well, now I've got to change what I'm doing, or I'm already part way through that step. Now you're asking me to go back, and there's a bit of lost time, or I've tried to do the upload and it hasn't worked first time, therefore it's too hard. So rather than trying to work out potentially the workarounds or work out what's gone wrong to make it easier next time, there's just an element of, I have to deliver for my client, I can't spend the time to figure this out. And regardless of how much training you give, there's an element of, until people taste it, smell it, can see it properly in action, like actually being delivered in the heat of a project, they won't actually understand some of the fundamentals, regardless of the level of training that you get. So you guys would have probably found something like this. You give people training and everyone says, yeah, it looks great. And then as soon as they start using it, that's when you'll get lots of questions. Oh, does it do this? Does it do that? This didn't seem to work for me. And it's only as people start testing it themselves. But when you're in a high pressure environment and you've got lots of things to deliver, you just want it easy. And easy is to revert back to how you've always done it, rather than the investment of time that, yes, if you do the first 2 or 3 projects using this system may be slower, may seem less efficient, but the efficiencies will come, and then that's when we'll start making time back 4 or 5 projects further down the line. People don't see that. People don't look at that, what good would look like in 5 or 6 projects' time. They just look at what's directly in front of them. It's exactly the same argument as if we're talking about modern methods of construction and design for manufactured assembly. For those kind of innovations to work, you need a very, very long-term view, and you need to look at investment in industry. You need to look at beyond the next project. You need to be looking at the next 10 or the next 20 or the next 50. Whereas as an industry, we only look at the next project that's directly in front of us. We don't have the bandwidth or the foresight to look further than that. So it's the same thing, in my view, as trying to embrace a new innovation and technology within a business.
Yeah. So someone in your position is kind of this management level. You can have kind of a big picture thinking, and you can see the value for the customer. You can see 5, 10 projects ahead. But for the kind of end user on the project, it's kind of different. They've got deliverables and a way of doing things. So would you attack the problem the same way, if you had your time again? Would you go about it the same way, or would you maybe be a bit more strategic and pick some parts we're going to deliver to the customer, we're going to try and adapt something else internally? How would you go about it?
There's two aspects to it. So if we just look at the client side for a minute, the original intention was or the original thinking, I should say, was that when clients have seen this and when we deploy this on their projects, clients will be able to log in at any point and just play around with the data, understand what's happening with their project, and through that platform interact with us directly. And we were like, this is going to become so seamless. And in theory, that's what should have happened. When we've actually used it on projects, that hasn't happened. Clients are not logging in because to them it's just another platform that they have to log in. And with everything else that clients are looking at, the cost bit is just one part. They're not looking, so they're dealing with project managers, they're dealing with architects. And the architect may have their own platform that they want you to log into. The PM may be insisting that you're using Arcadis, so you've got to log into that. So we've found that there's probably just a bit of a barrier there for clients to log in all the time. So that changed our view on how we need to approach using cost clarity with clients, is that don't expect clients to log in. That clearly isn't the scenario of what's happening. But what we should be doing is using cost clarity as a means to present, so that the client can still get all the same benefits, but we're actually using it as a tool to present and improve. Yeah, we're driving it. So that was a bit of an evolution of how we dealt with clients. When it comes to people, I think how we started when it was a small team was exactly the right way of doing it, because we had a lot of people from graduates to directors in workshops about coming up with the user stories and what functionality we wanted early days and how do we want this to work. So when we started, it was a very, very small team. There was a lot of input. So what was originally developed, everyone liked because they all felt they had a say. As we got bigger, and then as we then deployed it to the rest of the global business, there's lots of people there then who have their own ways of working, and they're like, well, this doesn't quite do this yet.
A lot more voices
it only
in the
does,
room.
Yeah, of the 10 things it only does the first 6. So tell us when it does 10, and then we'll use it. And there's still a benefit to using it for the 6 items that it already does. So I think how we've rolled it out,
they're looking
how
for
we've
a blocker,
communicated
perhaps.
it. Well, that's change, right? This comes back to the change management thing. Is that if the change management isn't on point, and if you don't get everybody on the bus early enough, people will look for reasons not to use it.
Matthew, just playing devil's advocate here, do you think it's because it was in-house tech and perhaps there wasn't that, the fact no one was having to pay an external provider for this level of service? It was kind of within, it was developed within the, the wider business, perhaps that detachment.
That may be part of it. But part of the reason we went down this path as well, there's 2 reasons why we went down this path. One of them was whenever I've seen, working at some of our competitors previously, whenever I've seen them trying to do their own digital innovation and drive betterment in what they do, they engage an external software developer and they give them a briefing, and then the software developer goes away for a few weeks, months, whatever. And when they come back and present what they've done, their interpretation of the brief, it really doesn't do what was asked. Because as QSs or anybody with their with their
You've got domain knowledge.
Yeah, we know the problems that we're trying to solve. Trying to explain those problems and our potential solutions to a third party who does not operate in the industry on the at the same level that we do, it is actually quite difficult to get that interpretation across. Either we're not explaining it well enough, or they're just not understanding, and it's probably a combination of both things. So I've seen a lot of money thrown into solutions that just never get adopted by the rest of the business. So building it in-house gave us a bit more control about what we did. We actually hired a software developer into the business to sit alongside us. So that could, and this guy used to be a QS. He actually restudied. He started working as a QS, and after a few years, he went back to university to study software development. So he understood the language and he understood some of the basic problems we were trying to solve. So that was a bit of a unicorn moment for us in terms of you couldn't necessarily get that from an external software company. So build it in-house allowed us to solve some of those problems. But the problem we had is that because we were doing it in-house, we didn't necessarily, I won't say not necessarily, we didn't really understand what we needed to do from a change management perspective when it came to software. Because whenever we've bought an external product, and it goes back to kind of your comment a minute ago, Ricky, when you buy something external, or the business decides that we're going to go down this route, we're going to use Oracle, or we're going to use SAP or whatever, and they buy this product and they put it into the business, there's just that edict of, you will use this. We'll give you all the training, but you will use it because we are spending lots of money on this. And everybody groans and everybody bitches and everybody complains and everybody talks about how it doesn't work and doesn't do what it needs to do.
But you're all on the same side at least.
Exactly. With where we've got to with cost clarity, we're probably still at the why don't we just use it? I'm trying to be a bit too pally about it. But with the amount of sunk hours now in terms of development, testing and everything else, we've spent quite a bit of money on this now ourselves, even though it's within the business and it's not a check leaving it's not a check leaving the door. So there is an element of, it was like, right, we've tried the carrot. We've tried several carrots. We've almost had an entire farm full of carrots. So at what point do we just turn this into a bit of a stick? So we're at that kind of point at the moment. At the end of the day, it comes back to people and it comes back to change.
Yes.
I think it's a cool, I guess, exercise to go under and a lot of learnings. I think, would you agree that when you do an internal development, you often do it because something doesn't exist in the market, and sometimes the scope starts like this and then kind of grows and then that's at the point that it becomes very hard to maintain and implement. Would you agree with that, or is like you always kept a small scope around it?
No, absolutely. So the reason we started down this particular path was because there is nothing on the market that does what this does, because it is very much tailored for what we deliver as QSs. So there's nothing in the market that does it. There's lots of things in the market that say they do it, but they do not to the extent that we've tried to do it. So when we started, it was very, very simple. It was you do an upload and then, you actually, this is your cost plan. You'll have a bit of a dashboard, summary, detailed breakdown, comparisons, reconciliations done for you, automatic cash flow, bit of benchmarking, right? And it was a bit like very, very basic building blocks. And then because of the complexity of what we do and also because different clients want slightly different things, I mean, ultimately, every client thinks that their needs are specific to them. But what we found is that every client, if you develop something in response to a client's need, like client A, we generally find that client B, C, and D also like it as well. But every client thinks that what they're asking for is specific for them. So you end up having, by trialing it with clients say, oh, can it do this? Can it do that? Or we would love to engage you on this project or this program of work to use this, except it doesn't do this yet. So that sends you down all these little kind of avenues to develop other functionality. And it does potentially get a little bit too big. So the question I'm having now with our product team in the UK is, right, I want to reinvigorate cost clarity in Australia, right? There is so much to it now. Let's talk about how we would re-roll this out. How do we give people the building blocks? Not give them everything in one go, because it'll be like all we can in the window is going to overwhelm people. So it's very much a case of like, how do we reinvigorate it, get the interest back, get people to start using it, but using the basics. And once they've got the basics mastered, they'll then start looking for the other bits of functionality that just try and start accelerating both user and client experience.
That makes sense. Matt, just to kind of change the tack here a little bit. So obviously you've gone through all of that, and it sounds like it's going to get resolved one way or the other.
One way or the other, yeah.
With your crystal ball, like, what does the future hold for like construction, tech and construction? Like, do you ever, someone like you, I imagine, is keeping an eye on what's happening in the space of AI and how perhaps AI agents are going to play a part. Like, do you factor some of that in? Is that kind of going through your head? Like, what's the
It's it's obviously extremely difficult to predict, because the pace of change, particularly in the last couple of years, has been significant. I don't subscribe to some of the extreme predictions out there that AI is going to do everything for us and QSs aren't going to have a job and all that kind of thing. Because I came into the industry in '98, and they were saying then because of 5D BIM, QSs won't be needed in a few years. Well, it's 25 years later, and I'm still here.
You're a living proof.
Years later, I'm still here. So I'm living proof that the QS. When we talk about adapt or die, the QS is still here, punching above its weight. So. Yeah, I'm not one of those doom-mongers that AI is going to take over the role, but I think there's a place for it. I think, like the stuff that you guys are doing from the design side, the stuff that like take cost clarity, for example, a natural evolution of that is going to be if we have some kind of AI bot built within cost clarity that just does analysis based on the data that's in the system. So things like, based on this parameter of project, how much would this kind of project cost me? And it just looks at the data. So it would still be a proprietary, it would still be IP, still be all the information we've got in there. It's just using the data that we've got it, rather than us downloading stuff, put it into Excel, and then trying to interpret it ourselves. So there's an element of power and innovation there, which just makes things more efficient. But broadly more about the construction industry, we're just really slow at kind of adopting tech and innovating. Is like, we can all point to examples where things have done more efficiently and better.
Sure.
But if you generally look at how we are building, from houses to build to rent to high rises, all the rest of it, we're still fundamentally building in the same way that we were 30 years ago. There hasn't been, a massive amount of change in terms of how we actually operate. Yeah, we're using CAD drawings now. We're using stuff like Arcadis. There are more portals, and even stuff like SharePoint and Smart Sheets is a level of innovation over what we were doing 15, 20 years ago. But how we actually move the dial forward, like actually turn the dial so that things become easier to build, quicker to build, more efficient, cheaper to build in the long run, we're a long way away from there. And that's where the industry needs to move to. So where we've got all these challenges at the moment about skills and labour shortages, that's generally because we're still building the same way. We're not doing the investment in stuff like modern methods of construction and DFMA that I mentioned earlier. We're not doing that level of investment. There was a drive from government not that long ago about built in Australia, and having an industry built around DFMA is kind of key to that. But you can only build that industry if there's a market for it, and we're not doing the investment to create the market in the first place. It's not being led to the extent that it needs to be done from government. And if it's led by government, eventually the private sector will take over. But private sector they're just not going to do that level of investment for what's currently on the books, etc. So we just really need to try and drive how we change. The industry needs to change, because we're still going to have a labour and skills shortage in the next 10, 15 years, because we're at the point now with growing populations, with ageing assets.
Sure.
We're going to continue to build. We're going to continue to build more and more stuff. And at the moment, we're still, particularly if you take Queensland, for example, it's still broadly the same supply chain that's delivering it. And we're building more now than we have done in the last 10, 15 years. And it's still the same size supply chain. Potentially with a few less players. So we've got to find ways of doing it better.
I think you touched on a lot of things there. We all understand the complexity that exists in construction industry. You've even spoken about the changes, perhaps how slow they've been in the industry. You've been around it for 27 years. So I know you also sit on some committees, but what can we collectively do to shift or move that needle? Because I feel like we're talking about the same things over and over again. I've heard this time, but at least the last 10 years. Yeah. So like what's going to have to change? Like what's the call out?
I think there's no right answer to it. I've sat on a number of committees. I've been on a number of industry panels. And I've made the statement a few times that, when I look at everybody in the room, like whoever's attending the event that I'm sitting on the panel of, and I challenge everybody that what are you going to do differently today that is going to start making a change. Because sometimes we will talk about the macro changes, what the little steps we can do that's going to result in big change down the track. I don't think there's enough of us doing that. I think driven from a commercial standpoint, fees, fees and margins aren't necessarily at the level they need to be for people to drive the investment, because everything's about driving down towards lowest cost. So nobody does the investment that they need to do to drive things forward, which is why I think, and I don't like pointing the finger at any one party, but it needs to be led by government. Government needs to put legislation in place. They need to drive by example. There's plenty of examples where where government have said, we're going to do, we want to do more modern methods of construction. We want to do more, DFMA, modular construction. But then they don't actually create the pipeline or the investment. They just say they would like to.
Yeah.
Well, the industry is not going to create that itself. It needs to understand what it's responding to. So when you think about hospitals, when you think about schools, when you think about defence projects, when you think about elements of even on the private side, elements of retail, elements of offices, student accommodation. I mean, student accommodation is probably the best example for it. But there are so many sectors where it's repeatable, but it's not about that one project, because everyone looks at the modern methods of construction as an opportunity to do things cheaper. So on the first project, and I've seen this happen probably on over the last 10 years, probably about half a dozen projects where we start off with the right intention of we're going to do DFMA, we're going to have modularized components, we're going to do it modular, whatever it is. And you start off with that intention, and then you get the pricing back from the market, and they're like, oh, that's not any cheaper. It would actually be cheaper for us to actually build it traditionally. Well, we understand that, so we build it traditionally. But it goes back to that long-term view of, if you've got one of these projects, but you are going to do another 10 on the back of it, you need to be thinking about that 10 realistically, not just about an if and when. You need to be almost building that pipeline now, so that when you go to your modular provider, you can say, we want to, for this project, we need 50 panelised units, 100 panelised units, whatever it is. But on the back of this, there's 10 more projects times 100. And that's
it's almost like we're trying to lose weight without going to the gym. There's going to be some pain.
That's exactly it. We're looking for the Zempic of the construction, and it doesn't exist.
Do you want to just rezoom or refocus a little bit? So you got this big picture, big industry problems. What if you go down to that level where you see tier 3 contractors, and every other week another one goes under? Probably something to do with cost controls. If you were to give those guys just a couple of tips or advice, maybe they don't have big overheads, or they can't necessarily have an in-house person managing this. What's some principles that they could look at their business and go, we need to do this to get better?
Well, I'm not a business advisor, so I'm probably not the right person to be asking about this, and I'm happily recommend some, but I'm not it. But I think when you look at the insolvencies and the massive spike we're getting at the moment, it's not actually tier 3s or tier 2s. It's not head contractors that largely form that list. It's traders, it's suppliers, it's mum and dad operators. It's it's literally a guy with an ABN. They're the ones who are underpinning that 1,000 companies a month or quarter or whatever the figure is that is actually driving that. So and it's a systemic problem. Part of the problem we've got is that when we talk about improving collaboration, improving relations in the industry, we tend to just limit that conversation between the client and the head contractor. And usually on the bigger stuff, so government and tier 1 contractor building a stadium or a road or a rail project, and extend down from there. We're only talking about that top contractual relationship. And head contractors, obviously, they want to have a better relationship with the client. They want to be more collaborative because they want to improve their margin, because their margin is ridiculously low. It's been ridiculously low for God knows how long. But the behaviours that they want to improve upon aren't replicated down from the contractor down to his trade contractors, his subcontractors, his suppliers, or her suppliers, I should say. That's not replicated down
the supply chain.
The kind of the loggerhead, argumentative kind of contractual relationship that exists between client and contractor, which is a bit we've wanted to change for decades, That's all in many cases, not all cases. There are plenty of good examples, but the managing contractors also drive their trade contractors to. They don't want to get variations off their trade contractors. They don't want to be paying, because there's no guarantee that they're going to recover that from the client. So they're just as hard on their supply chain as the client is potentially with the head contractor. And that's what's so when they got the contractor trying to save money, he's passing the risk down the line as far as he can. And then and a lot of these companies do not have the cash flow or the bandwidth to cope with, that level of investment that they have to take on board. And that's one of the, so it's not just the head contractor and the supply chain. It's not just the client and the head contractor. It's the whole contractual mechanism and the whole contractual chain, particularly when you're looking at lump sum, D&C, those kind of hard dollar contracts. It's all the way through. It's endemic. So it's not just about being visionary about stuff like MMC and trying and finding better ways of building. It's that entire contractual and commercial environment that's got to be really, really looked at to try and find a best for all parties. Unfortunately, we've ended up in this world where somebody has to feel like they've won.
Oh, yeah.
And that's and that's created that dynamic. And I honestly don't know how we get away from it, because holding hands and singing "Kumbaya" isn't necessarily the way to do it, which seems to be, we're getting these big events and we have these big conversations and everybody nods and agrees it needs to change, but then we all walk back out the door and we operate pretty much the same way.
Yeah, certainly contractually. But do you think it comes down to perhaps a better approach to tracking, or a better approach to transparency across, I've done this much work on site and I'm charging you for this much? Do you think there's too much fuzzy things going on there still?
Yeah, there is a lot of subjectivity to that kind of stuff, and this is where technology can help, but then it requires investment, because at the end of the day, technology comes at a cost, and whether it's time or money, somebody's got to pay for it, and that's usually where these things kind of fall down. But there are things out there from technology. We're exploring a couple at the moment. It's like, how do we just take if we're doing a progress claim assessment for a contractor, saying how much that contractor should get paid, we're looking at technology to take the subjectivity out of it. Because then there's less arguments, there's less claims. But there's also that, when you talk about the contractual chain, at the end of the day, construction and contracts is all about it's all about risk transfer, right? And when you're talking about risk, you're talking about things that can go wrong. And when you're talking about things that can go wrong, there is a dollar value. There is a cost for it somewhere. So when we're talking about, and we did last couple of years, we've done this market sentiment survey with head contractors, and all head contractors agree that the commercial and contract environment is terrible, and it doesn't, risk transfer isn't equitable. Now, I'm sure if we did the same survey with clients, they would say the same thing. So apparently nobody's happy, right? So nobody's happy with what's happening. But when you've got risk, the contractor's got a choice of trying to push as much back to the client as he can, or push it down his supply chain. The client's really got one choice. He just wants to pass it to the contractor. So, yes, we'd like it to be more collaborative. We'd like it to be more open. But that requires all parties to want to accept the very fact that they're probably going to pay more. And nobody wants to pay more because margins are diminished. And, particularly when you're a developer or government, if you're a government perspective, you promise you're going to deliver this for a value and you want to demonstrate taxpayer value, so you don't want to pay any more, so they fight against it. And if you're a developer, your project stacks up based on a business case that you've done, which requires a certain level of return. And if you start impacting that, then your project doesn't stack up anymore. So there are all those kind of commercial aspects which underpin the industry and drive all these behaviours, unfortunately.
No, some really solid points there, Matthew. Just changing the tack here again. We've spoken about all the challenges that exist in the construction industry, but you can also see the depth of passion that comes through from someone like yourself and Luke and myself, who've been in and around the industry for so long. We know, despite all of these issues, there's a huge demand. We've talked about aging workforce and all of the rest. So, what would be your advice to those ones who are, to the younger ones who are currently going through either BTAFE or university? Why should they consider joining construction industry for their future career? And what would you say to them? Why is it such a good industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, I can only talk about my experience
of course.
and the field that I work in. But I think it's the same for anybody, particularly who works in professional services, professional consultancy. Is that provided you don't get pigeonholed, the variety of things that you can get involved in is phenomenal. Right, you could be working on in terms of some of our, some people in our team, like younger guys, relatively in the early stage of their career. They're working on data centers, they're working on schools, they're working on build-to-rent development, they're working on roads and rail projects. We've done a bit of work in Brisbane on some of the stadiums that are coming out for the Olympics. So I always find that when you're working on projects, the variety of projects is potentially endless, depending on where the business you're in is positioned. Every job is more or less different because you never really encounter the same problems. We all talk about lessons learned, but generally every project I've worked on, it's a new set of problems and a new set of challenges than the last 2 or 3 that we've delivered. So learning curve there's always a learning curve. And you get to meet different people in the industry, right? The different project managers, different clients, different architects. So I don't know of another career where you get that level of variety. Well, other than the people in your team, which may be relatively static, apart from when you employ people and people leave, but the people you work with in the industry in terms of project teams and contractors is really, really broad. And there are some great people to work with, and there are some people who are an absolute horror to work with, but you will learn something from it nonetheless. And yeah, just that overall level of variety. And I think, when we talk about the labour shortages, we keep circling back to the same stuff. But when we're talking about how do we get more participation on site, how do we get more women onto construction sites, for example, we've got to create a different environment, right? And it's always, construction sites have always been seen as very blokey, lots of, and that's not necessarily an environment that women necessarily go into, which is totally understandable. But if we change the dynamic of the industry, if we change that some of the industry is actually delivered in in an industrial setting, a manufacturing setting, rather than it just being on site in your hard hat and your boots in either really hot conditions or wet conditions. If we change the environment and how the industry, then we'll attract more people into it. Part of the problem we've got is that when you look at not necessarily people coming through university, they're generally moving into some kind of professional role. It's the people coming from TAFE, and the number of people who go into TAFE to do trades, the pass rate of the proportion of people coming out the other end with a qualification and moving into the industry is massively reduced from the people who start. So we've got to understand what is that driver, what is stopping people from finishing their courses and then moving into the industry. If we can tackle that, we're going to end up with a lot more people in the industry.
We'll all keep working on it together for sure. So as we start to wrap up, mate, just maybe pick one thing you're excited about for the next 1 to 2 years, something to do with tech, or maybe even some of the initiatives you're running. What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I really wish you'd prime me with a really good answer.
Could be a sport event. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be work related.
No, I think if we just limit it to Queensland, and I know 2032 is still a relatively long way off. I mean, it's getting closer and closer, but it's a relatively long way off. But just in the next few weeks, right, we're going to start getting announcements from government about what's actually going to move forward, what projects are actually going to happen, whether we're building a new stadium, whether we're not building a new stadium. Smart Money says we are building a new stadium. And I know there's lots of discussion about whether that's the right thing, the good thing to do or not. But just the amount of change that's going to happen in SEQ, South East Queensland, and just in the next 2 or 3 years, just by progressing some of these projects, is going to be a game changer for the state. Bit of a comparison. The reason I'm focusing on that is that when I left the UK in 2010, in the middle of the GFC, I'd taken 2 pay cuts. We'd gone from an office in Manchester of about 28 people down to 12. And it was like, we're going to be in this for another 3 or 4 years. It was like the dark ages. So I moved to Australia and I moved to Brisbane, and I moved from an industry that was boom and bust. 5 years, 6 years of in it great to
feast or famine.
5 years it was feast or famine. And I moved to Brisbane, which was the slowest market I'd moved to. I'd worked in 10 years. It was honestly, in comparison, when you compare it to Sydney and Melbourne, we were dead on the table. We weren't really, we were kicking our heels. We weren't really that busy. And we're going to see something completely different over the next 5-6 years.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting. There are a lot of challenges to overcome, but challenges are good, right? Challenges are good. It means there's work for us.
Yeah,
Things
definitely.
Work through. There are solutions to put in place. So it's very easy to look at all the challenges and think it's all too hard. Isn't it depressing? But if we, the three of us and anybody who's listening to this have got, a hand on the tiller and they want to actually help drive change, there's going to be no better time than to try and do it over the next, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, look forward to those opportunities to work together. We have to get Ricky to move over here, bring the family over, move back.
Move back. I used to be there.
All right, Matthew. Well, really appreciate your time, mate. Appreciate you taking that time out to really share some of those insights, some of those initiatives that you've done internally, how Arcadis is leading this, charge to deliver a great service for their clients. And looking forward to the future and all these things that you've shared. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, mate. Thanks for
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the passion.
Yeah.
Thank you.